Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei skipped content video. We are here with Season 2, Part 1, Episode 8 today. And I'll be going over everything that the light novel had skipped or changed scenes or whatever. Anything that's different and that's kind of important. And so, let's just jump into things. We are now into another volume, Volume 9, and it's the last book adapted in the season, so hooray! We start off with a bit of an overview with Cliff and his point of view ever since we last saw him, since he was like with Eris that day, like all the way back in Season 1 up until now. So Cliff was the grandson of the Mills Church's reigning pope and was a gifted magician. However, he was also very hot-tempered, egotistical, and a pompous braggart, and as a result, he had no friends. He was also 16 years old, meaning he had come of age no more than a year ago, but no one had celebrated that milestone with him, unfortunately. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but I feel bad for, like, Zenoba, right? The way that Rudius treats him just isn't amazing, and he's kind of had a bit of a rough life. But so is Cliff. He may be a total jerk, but he's also kind of innocent in a way, you know? I feel bad for him. I don't know. Anyway, because of the attempted assassination on the Miko, in which Eris had promptly stopped from happening, there had grown internal conflict within the Mills Church, and it became quite intense and violent, and so the Pope had sent Cliff off to go to, like, the far side of the world for his own safety, and that's why he's in Renoa. His parting words with his grandfather were, "You have the potential to be a great man someday, Cliff. Don't let yourself grow self-satisfied. Know your flaws and work to overcome them." Cliff was raised to become the next pope, and his destiny really couldn't be altered. However, he knew that and was ready to work towards that. He may not be as talented as the brilliant swordswoman Eris, but he was a prodigy that believed in his own power. Much of Renoa wasn't to his liking, but still, he'd push through any challenge that faced him. He was a special student, the grandson of the Pope, and he was next in line to lead the Mills Church. Surely that meant that he was a cut above the rest. However, in his first year of being at Renoa, he had been embarrassed twice. The first time is when he spoke to Zenoba, who soon brought out his Roxy figure and started rambling on and on about it. Cliff couldn't care anything about what he said, but he really respected Zenoba because he knew what he wanted to do in life. He mentions as well that some scholars theorized that magic had originally been developed by the ancients as a means to help commoners imitate divine powers, although I don't know if that's true. If my memory serves me correct, it was created by elves and humans had imitated it during the Second Human-Demon War, or something like that anyway. But, however, blessed children like Zenoba were basically like a manifestation of those divine powers, so Cliff found it odd that Zenoba would be bothered to learn magic. But of course he found out why when Zenoba rambled on and on about his figure making. Cliff, curious, asked who his master was since he had brought him up so many times, and it was none other than Rudius Greyrat, the same person that Eris looked up to. That was a harsh blow to his ego. And now the second time that he'd been embarrassed was with Linnea and Persenna. Cliff thought that he was the strongest at the academy and he could basically beat most teachers. However, when it came to a very public battle between Linnea and Persenna, they instantly destroyed Cliff. At first he thought that it was unfair since it was a 2v1, but he had recalled an event in the past where Silent Fits had taken the two of them down in an instant. There was always someone better, as they say, but Cliff had never learned that lesson until now. Just because he knows advanced magic doesn't mean that he's good in combat. And after that, he doubled down on his education. However, he was too proud to learn from his professors, of course, let alone from other students, and so he began teaching himself ways to refine his craft. It proved a struggle, but he definitely kept at it. And then, during his second year at the university, he received another pair of shocks. The first was the enrollment of Rudius Greyrat. Based on what he heard of Rudius, the image doesn't really fit his appearance. Rudius was submissive, he put himself down, had an uncertain face, wore a shabby robe, and looked at every nearby woman. There was nothing appealing about this man whatsoever. He had convinced himself that Rudius was an imposter and had fooled Eris, lied to Zenoba, and spread false information that he had beaten Fitz in a fight. But soon enough, he saw that Rudius' strength was real, and he understood. He wasn't lying. Zenoba's affection for him had doubled. Linnea and Persenna were his loyal subordinates, and he had gotten much closer with Fitz. However, despite such abilities, Rudius was still attending classes, lectures on elementary, divine, and barrier magic. He had no real need to learn such basic magic, but did anyway. Both Cliff and Rudius were alike in that sense. They both had a desire for education. However, something that Cliff was able to admit, albeit only to himself, was that Rudius was superior. Normally, it'd be very difficult for him to admit something like that, but everything else that has happened to him in the past year kind of cushioned him for this. And now, this second shock came when he was walking back to his dorm one evening and caught an eye of a blonde beauty looking out of a window. She was the most pretty and beautiful woman he'd ever seen, with her luxuriant golden hair fluttering in the breeze. The setting sun cast a red glow on her shapely face. He was smitten. Love at first sight. Back when he was younger, when he had dreamed of becoming an adventurer, he had also pictured himself marrying a gorgeous woman, although, I mean, don't we all? In his orphanage, there was a young healer that would visit sometimes, and it had been a big reason why Cliff wanted to start adventuring in the first place. But then, the blonde woman in the window glanced down at Cliff, and with a smile, she waved her hand. I was born to meet this woman, he thought, and she was born to meet me. In that instant, his first love heiress had been demoted in his mind to the status of just an acquaintance. So yeah, Cliff, he's kind of head over heels for Alenalise. But although the anime did skip this, they did also change the beginning scene of the episode, so I'll just talk about that. So in the books, it was now the monthly mandatory homeroom. Rudy sat at his desk surrounded closely by Zenoba, Juliet, Linnea, and Persena. It felt nice to have actual friends like these. And as usual, Linnea was leaning back in her chair with her feet on the desk, flaunting her shapely thighs without a hint of shame. That was another perk of this new position over the Beast Folk princesses. He got to see that on a regular basis. Linnea comments that he never stops staring at her thighs and calls him a tomcat and says, "Hey, go on, take a peek inside." And then he touches her thighs and then she screams and is like, "Get your hand out of there, stop it, no, enough." But even just groping her thighs like under the skirt, it didn't really make him feel anything. He was still empty. What made him feel more pleasure was touching her ears or tail, which at least that was something like fuzzy and relaxing to touch. That part of the scene isn't overly different. I just like the book's version a little bit more. However, the books do extend this scene a little bit more. We get an update on Juliet's figure making process. She was able to make general shapes, but doesn't have the magical dexterity to form them into complex figures yet. It all comes with time. However, no matter how gentle and kind Rudius is with her, she's still very scared of him. After that, Linnea mentions to Rudius how there's a great spot for midday naps and asks if he'd like to join sometime. Rudius, being Rudius, is like, could I do naughty things with you while you sleep, Linnea? And she goes like, do you ever think about anything other than sex, boss? And then Zenoba pipes up and goes, "Oh, of course! Figures are at the forefront of his mind." Both Linnea and Persena tell him to shut up, and then, they tell him to go buy them some meat. They're all lightheartedly arguing with each other for a moment before Cliff tells them to shut up. That part of the scene plays out the same, but Rudy's backs down because he respects Cliff and is wanting to learn and clearly has something he's working toward in life. However, he could tell that he and Cliff were heading down very different paths in life and could never be anything more than acquaintances. Or so he thought at the time. A week later, Rudius is shown to continue his research on teleportation with Fitz. He now understands that teleportation shares many similarities with summoning magic. The circles used were very much alike, and the color that they emitted when activated was the same as well. However, one difference between teleportation and summoning is that it's impossible to summon a human being. Across all histories of every race, not a single piece of evidence has been found to support the idea of a person being summoned. You can summon fiends, spirits, and even plants, really, but not a person. However, Rudius wonders if it's possible to summon the soul of a person rather than their physical person, which is obviously him wondering about how he got transported to the world because it's, his soul must have, not him. But Rudius then asks Fitz if a professor at the academy teaches summoning, but none do. There's only one that teaches enchantment, which is apparently a subcategory, although I'm not too sure what it is. It's never explained, and I don't know what it is, sorry. He also starts to wonder if his summoning and reincarnation to this world is somehow related to the displacement incident. But then again, a whole decade has passed since those events occurred, so he's not exactly sure if they're connected. After that, Rudy stumbles upon Cliff running away from the other students. He gets beat up by them, then Rudius saves him. The next day, Rudius thinks that Cliff has called him out to ask him out, but it's revealed that he's actually interested in Alenalise. Rudius goes into a bit of detail on the good and the bad side of her. She's beautiful, obviously, very kind, gets good grades, and even incorporated beginner-tier water magic into her fighting style. However, and to quote Rudius, she is also a monster in the sack. So in a previous episode, I had mentioned that she's in a bit of like a Shota phase, and more specifically, she's into virgins. The awkward, uncertain freshmen are apparently very charming to her. Those with like a false sense of bravado were just adorable to her. She loves watching how they learn new things and grow over time. And so Cliff fits perfectly into this description. However, of course, Cliff is clearly into a more monogamous relationship and imagines her to be a virgin as well, assuming like he's a virgin himself. I can only imagine. And so Rudius is conflicted on what to do, and so he turns to Fitz for advice. Overall, the scene went similar, but the big difference is that there's a clear comparison between Cliff and Alina-Lisa's situation and Fitz's, or in this case, Sylphie and Rudius's. She goes like, I don't know, it's kind of tough just sitting there watching them when you can't tell the person how you feel. So you have to introduce them, give the chance to get it off his chest at the very least, which is kind of the exact advice that she needs to follow. She needs to just build up the confidence and tell Rudius what she feels like no matter what happens, no matter what the consequences are. Anyway, Rudius introduces Cliff to Leonise, which goes pretty word for word. However, they messed up on Cliff's greeting. He did an Asuran introduction rather than one that's taught in Millis. He was supposed to like press his fist up against his stomach and then bring his feet near here. You know what? He's supposed to do this, right? He goes, I think, feet together. You can't really see my feet. Yeah. Good try trying to look at my feet, you perverts. Yeah, sure. You don't want to see them, all right? They're like some hands. I got like monkey feet going on down there. Millis introduction. All you do is just this. Put your feet together, and I think you do a bow. I don't even know if you do a bow. I think it's literally just you put that together and that's it. That's all you do. There's no like Asuran swish. You don't do that shit. Nuh-uh, not a Millis. Not a Millis. Nuh-uh. Get your shit together, anime. Anyway, I don't actually care too much, but for like world building purposes, it does suck that they messed that up. It ultimately doesn't matter to 99.99% of people though, except for me. Anyway, then we skip to a week later as we have Rudius join the next monthly homeroom meeting to find Alina-Lisa and Cliff acting very lovey-dovey with each other and like full-on making out in the classroom. Also, side note, I think that we should be at the start of the 5th month since Rudius enrolled at the academy, meaning it's probably fall of the year K422. It's been a while since I've mentioned dates around here, and there's a full like official timeline breakdown that I'm going to get around to doing sometime in the new year. I'm excited for that because it's an actual official timeline. We have a breakdown like year by year what happens. It's amazing. But anyway, that scene is actually continued a bit further in the books, this homeroom. Rudius thinks about why Alina-Lisa would ever go for Cliff, considering everything, really. And it was quite simple. Every man that has ever met Alina-Lisa has really only cared about her body. Not that she really didn't care about theirs either. Those, you know, it's fair enough, right? But for a man to say that they will dedicate their life to curing her curse, now that can make you fall for someone. Sure, she might have liked sex, but it was undoubtedly a hindrance to her, and she really wasn't able to, like, even be in a committed relationship because of it, even if she wanted to, right? Never being able to settle down with someone would certainly get lonely after a while, especially for how long elves live for. But anyway, the only ones who cared about what Alina-Lisa and Cliff were doing was Linnea. Apparently, Alina-Lisa had called her some nasty names when confronted. Linnea suggests for her and Rudius to start dating and to give them a taste of their own medicine. Rudius goes like, you know what? I might be willing to give that a shot. Tell me something, though. If I took you up on that, would you help me find a cure for my impotence? And at that moment, everyone in the room, except for Alina-Lisa, gave a full, like, audible gasp in surprise. At first, he thought that they were reacting to, like, if he and Linnea started dating, but Linnea nervously asked Rudius if he had overheard her and Presena talking earlier. At lunch, I guess they had talked about when Rudius tied them up and groped them, but never went further than that. At first, they thought that he was just a pervert, but soon wondered if he simply couldn't operate down there. It almost brought a tear to Linnea's eye when she heard about it that way. Linnea says, like, yeah, you know, who cares if you're impotent, boss, right? It's not like we're gonna think any less of you. And Presena says, yeah, look, you might be impotent, but you're still our boss. Don't worry, we got your back. Zenoba goes like, hey, there's no need to let this goat get to you, master. We have our figurines, let us live for their sake. And Juliet asked, like, what's impotent? And Zenoba says that it's just like, it's when a man can't perform his roles, like, you know, he didn't get any graphic with it, don't worry. He's like, yeah, it's not important though. It has no relevance to the creation of figurines. Juliet, you have no need to worry about impotence. Nothing to do with that. Persena, though, then says that she'll help him out in any way that she can, so long as he brings her some meat first. And Zenobia appears to be trying to, like, cheer Rudius up, as Linny and Persena give some forced expressions of sympathy, but it wasn't really doing much to help. But then lastly, Cliff had chimed in and said, "Well, for what it's worth, Rudius, I learned how to hear confessions as a part of my training. They say I don't have much talent in the area, but maybe I could talk things through with you, at least. You know, let me know if you ever need someone to lend an ear, alright?" And Cliff's words sounded warm and genuine. If he were a girl, Rudius might have fallen in love. But with that, the special students now know of Rudius's curse. It was awkward, but they had at least offered some cooperation and didn't make fun of him at all. But anyway, then next up we have a very short side story, Sylphiette Part 3. So again, the side stories paint us a picture as though Fitz isn't Sylphie. And this is from the point of view of Sylphie. So Sylphie sees Elenalise and Cliff walking down the halls being quite intimate, to say the least. Most people think that Elenalise is just playing around with Cliff and will leave him sooner or later, but from the looks of things from Sylphie's point of view, the two of them were genuinely in love with each other. Even Ariel was surprised by this and comments that Rudius really is impressive. They watch Rudy talk to the two lovebirds as he gave an awkward smile. Elenalise gives a warm smile as Cliff gives one of respect to Rudius. Before, Cliff used to despise Rudy, but because of this development with Elenalise, his attitude had changed completely. Sylphie now thinks like, is Rudy involved with anyone? According to Luke, every Nodos Grey Rat was a born womanizer, and Rudy had been making a lot of female friends. It's hard to picture Rudius not following in line with that. After all, when he did find out that Sylphie was a girl, he did treat her differently, possibly trying to hold back. As she thought all this, Rudy caught her eye and waved. However, Rudy wasn't waving at Sylphie. She knew this. She was waving at Fitz. The two had gotten quite close over the past few months, but he didn't even realize that Sylphie was here. Moving on, she followed Ariel as she set off down the hall. And that is the end of that little side story there. It's not too long, pretty short, but more Sylphie point of view. Hooray. Most of which the anime skips. But anyway, now we continue further, skipping about a month ahead, making it half a year since Rudius had enrolled at the academy, and he does confirm that it is fall, although it doesn't last too long in the Northern Territories. Fall was important for many reasons. This is when the food was prepared, harvested, and laid in storage for the winter ahead, and there were some festivals held across various towns and cities, but possibly most importantly for some was the Beast Folks mating season had begun. There were only about 5% of Beast Folk students at the school, which meant that there's about 500 of them. That was a good number, but not so much in comparison to the 10,000 students that were enrolled at the academy. However, despite their small presence in numbers, they were everywhere now. The Beast Folks mating season's tradition was to have a one-on-one duel that typically involved a man and a woman. From there, whoever won would be considered the boss of the new pack that they were forming. Some Beast Folk even traveled here from distant lands to challenge some students into these romantic duels. The school obviously didn't like strangers coming onto the campus, but they had to let it slide because they didn't want to start any riots or wars over this. And so, incoming challengers would have to, like, enroll at the academy, but not really. It's like a semi-enrollment. And so, because of all the chaos that happens, there are some casualties that can happen. People who aren't Beast Folk sometimes are challenged and beaten for no reason, and others, particularly non-Beast Folk individuals, take advantage of the situation to perform some pretty bad stuff to people. And I'm not going to explain further, because it's some nasty stuff. Because it's some no good bad things that they do and exploit over. Anyway, Fitz had actually warned Rudius of this and told him to turn down any challenge that he was given, because regardless of the victor, if he accepted, that would mean that either him or the person he fought would be the leader of their pack. And although Rudius loved the idea of having a harem of Beast Folk women, if he did it now, he'd basically just be rubbing salt in his own wounds. But when it comes to Linny and Persena, they were basically unobtainable. They were probably the two strongest Beast Folk students at the school, and whoever beat them would essentially become royalty and rule the Dolia tribe in the future. The two of them came to this academy to study, not to find a husband. And so, after they became of age, they were bombarded with proposals, all of which were rejected. However, the following year, there were even more proposals, and some had even jumped them in attempts to gain a very, slimy victory. And so they just kept to the room this season, left it to boss, and hid, even skipping the monthly homeroom for medical leave, in a way, I guess. But the thought of the two writhing around in the rooms, meowing and woofing passionately, was kind of exciting to Rudius. Not that his thoughts could really do anything for him at the moment, though, but, it's a good thought, you know, it's a good mental picture in your mind. Anyway, Rudius was thinking all about this while looking at Cliff and Alenalice and wondering how much longer their relationship could keep on. Because unlike the Beast Folks' mating season that only lasted during the fall, Alenalice's mating season lasted all year. But then he was interrupted by Zenoba asking him to make another figure. The last figure that Rudius had tried to make was an Eris one as some kind of like therapy. However, he became like a mess halfway through and he gave up. And so the two decided to make a red worm, to which Juliet asks what that is. Rudius explains his encounter with one and she has sparkles in her eyes and is in awe. Rudius says, alright then, I'll make a red worm figure for you, Julie. But then Zenoba gets jealous that he isn't making one for him. But then Rudius just starts thinking about life. He hadn't exactly hit a wall or anything, but his growth and improvement in terms of magic, fighting, and training has certainly slowed. He is learning beginner divine and barrier magic and will try advanced healing in the next semester, but aside from that, it's very stagnant. Not that he's necessarily complaining or anything, but he does notice his lack of improvement. Then again, there's Enchantment class, which is apparently again a subcategory of summoning, although it's involved in the creation of magical implements. And so that's a class that he's potentially interested in taking, but he also thinks about just not taking any classes at all and just starts like 100% researching the displacement incidents, although he had already hit a wall with that as well. He could always learn new languages and ask Cliff to tutor him in divine magic on the side, but then again, Cliff is busy with his schooling and with Alenalice. On the other hand, he could just try to learn something completely unrelated to magic, like how to ride a horse or something. That's kind of where Rudius' mind was at nowadays. Then the interaction between Rudius and the Beastfolk man, as well as seeing that blue-haired woman, went about the same. However, on his way to the library, he had been jumped 5 times, and apparently there was like a lineup going on. Perhaps part of the tradition as well, like to, you know, there's an order to things, I guess. However, when he arrived at the library, whether due to the Beastfolk's tradition or simply just following the school rules, no one had attacked him within the library. The conversation between Fitz and Rudius went on a little bit longer, however. The two discussed what Rudius should do and ultimately decide that it would probably be best just for him to fight them all. Rudius questions why the student council doesn't really do anything about this, but it's because they're doing all that they can to protect the weaker students from getting caught up in all of this and like they're just patrolling the school. It was actually Fitz's duty tonight to do a patrol around, and Rudius asks if he could take down the beastmen out there with him, but because of Rudius's interest in that one girl in the crowd, Fitz gives him a little sass saying like, oh, please, why don't you take care of it yourself, Rudius? I don't think you need our help, right? Sylphie gets, Fitz, Sylphie, she gives him some sass. but Rudius thinks that it's because of what happened when the two of them met, how Rudius had beaten Fitz within just a few seconds. If he goes around cowering from fights, it would then look bad on Fitz, right? And so Rudius and Fitz left the library after a few hours and saw the battlefield that Badigati had turned it into. The two talk for a second before Badigati issues a challenge to Rudius. He thinks to himself that Badigati might let him off the hook if he offered him 2 slightly furry young maidens as a sacrifice, perhaps. But we get it explained that many countries around Renoa had soon heard of Badigati's arrival in the central continent. Normally news of a demon king arriving would have reached them well before his arrival, but he had been moving at such quick speeds that these countries had only found out as he arrived. The rulers of these nations were thrown into a state of confusion and panic, which was totally understandable. Demon kings normally never ventured outside of the demon continent. There were some very aggressive demon kings in the past, but they were all mostly exterminated during the Laplace War. The survivors who now ruled over the demon continent were either peaceful or cautious by nature and were no longer interested in conflict. However, regardless of this, demon kings were still very powerful enough to rule over sections of the demon continent, and if any one of them decided to go on a rampage on humanity's territory, the damage would be incalculable. Renoa, Neris, and Bashrand all reacted instantly to Badigati's arrival, dispatching knights and calling the Adventurers Guild to stop them. However, their forces were still some distance away from the Magic University. As an emergency stopgap, the small units of the magical nation's soldiers already in Sharia had joined the local adventurers to assist holding off Badigati until reinforcements arrived. Based on his physical descriptions, there was only one demon king that could be identified, and that was, of course, Badigati, the Immortal. He was one of the ancient kings who had lived since before the Laplace War, and rumor had it that he actually fought against Laplace himself. That would mean that the fearsome demon god had failed to completely destroy this man. This Badigati is something else, and what Badigati wanted was unknown. Why he traveled from the demon continent to the central continent, knocking out students and beastmen alike, was a total mystery. It wouldn't be a while until anyone learned the answers to these questions. And now we cut to Rudius dealing with the situation at hand, standing at the university's advanced magical training ground, aka just a large, like, empty courtyard. Unlike in the anime, Rudius didn't give Batagati like a timid pose going like, "Oh, I'm sorry for the wait, Mr. Batagati." He stood there with his legs spread out, arms crossed. He showed dominance, although he was freaking out like a little bitch on the inside. And although Rudius was getting a bit cocky recently, which is something he wanted to avoid, fighting a Demon King was still way above him, and even he can admit that. And then soon a man in a toupee ran up to Rudius and asked him to buy some more time. This man, Rudius later found out, is the principal of the school, George, who is a king-tier wind magician. Rudius and Batagati speak about Kishirika, how Rudius has a larger monopool than Laplace, who had one of the biggest pools in history. I just thought that was interesting to mention. It's not that Laplace had the biggest monopool, it's one of, which means that there are still people stronger than Laplace out there, which... yeah, I guess makes sense. You know, there's the gods and everything out there, but still it's... I mean, I guess he is a god himself, though, but, like, the actual gods. I guess there are still going to be those stronger, but it's interesting that he's not even at the top of the food chain, you know? But anyway, Rudius asked a question about Hitogami, and then he brought up Orsted. It kind of just how it goes in the anime. But Fitz then finally returns with Rudius' staff, Aquahardia, and something I forgot to mention in a previous episode is... because Rudius has had Aquahardia for over 10 years now, he was debating on naming it something like Charlene for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't know why that name in specific as well. But anyway, what was keeping Fitz so long was the professor stopping him from allowing Rudius to start the duel. It's not that he couldn't find it or he was just too slow, because he does have the magic running shoes that like double or triple his speed, so it literally can't be it. It's literally just that people were trying to stop Rudius from being brutally murdered. But Rudius and Fitz have a cute little conversation as he explains about his magical shoes. Rudius is like, "Oh, are your glasses magical too?" And she laughs about it, and it's just, you know, it's adorable. But Rudius then pulls the cloth off of Aquahardia, and he's like, "Yo, Fitz, look at this magical stone. What do you think of it?" And Fitz is like, "It's really big, Rudius." it's the conversation there had Rudius' little man downstairs act up a little bit. But anyway, after that, Rudius tries to see Batagati with his demon eye, but he just, like, literally can't. Like, Batagati does not exist when he looks through his demon eye. And this is because Batagati is immune to the effects of demon eyes, somehow. But Rudius then fires a stone cannon, which far exceeds the power that he used against Orsted and blows Batagati to pieces. However, he isn't able to return to his full form yet. He's in like a half state when he regenerates. He's not like back to 100% Batagati like he is in the anime. It doesn't really matter, but it just shows that the anime does something where it just makes everybody more powerful than they actually are, which is funny. But in this case, it's with Batagati. His regeneration isn't that quick. But anyway, with Batagati, you know, after he was revived, he punched Rudius with one fist in the anime. In the books, he punched him with all three. So that hurt. But after the battle, Batagati had left to talk with the principal of the school, George, the leader of the magical guild, and the captain of the magical nation's knights stationed in the city. It sounded like none of them were entirely clear on what was going on themselves. The Demon King had showed up out of nowhere, wandered around knocking out both students and beast folk alike, challenged Rudius to a duel, allowed him to claim victory, then knocked him unconscious. It sounded ridiculous. But Genus, the vice principal, however, seemed to be very excited over the situation, as it was able to get his blood pumping for the first time in years. Rudius was worried that since all of this trouble was partially his fault, since Batagati was after him, Genus would be angry with him, but that doesn't seem to be the case. But after that, he had left the teacher's building and ran into Zenoba, who started fanboying over him. However, Juliet seemed even more scared of Rudius, that poor child. But then, on his way back to his dorm, he found Cliff and a very pleased-looking Alenalise as she teases Rudius about what they were just doing, as Cliff gets embarrassed. But she asks what all the commotion was going on, and Rudius explains it, and she goes like, "Oh, yeah, he showed up pretty early, huh?" And Rudius is a little annoyed because she could have warned him that a Demon King was coming after him, but they both know that Batagati isn't a bad guy, so it's all water under the bridge. And then Cliff is a little bit jealous that he's kind of being left out of the conversation, and he asks about it. And Alina Lee starts to fondle him and stuff, and he goes like, no, Rudius is watching. And she's like, then let's show him a thing or two then. And they started making out in the hallway as Rudius just leaves. And now, finally, Rudius meets Fitz outside of his dorm room as the two talk about what just happened with Badigati and spoke about spells for a moment. To think that an intermediate spell could do that much damage. Rudius did focus on earth magic the past couple years, and so it seems as though the more that you use like one type of magic, the stronger it gets, which makes sense. But after that, Fitz lets Rudius get some rest as he runs off, much to Rudius' disappointment actually. He really wanted to talk with Fitz more, but after firing one pretty powerful stone cannon, Rudius is wiped. Old him would be absolutely ashamed. His stamina now is garbage. God, he fired one stone cannon. Yeah, it was like a nuke-sized cannon. I don't care, but still, like, man, current Rudius is a bitch, you know? From there, the next month passed by normally, and Badigati was recognized as an official state guest for the duration of his stay in the Magic Nations. To apologize for the hassle that he caused, he offered one of his arms so they could research his immortality, as well as being a temporary martial art teacher for the Knights in Sharia. The interaction, I guess, with Rudius touching Linnea's breasts went about the same. However, Zenoba chimes in with how fearless Rudius is with women, yet has so much restraint to not push himself further, but Cliff tells him to shut it, reminding him of Rudius's ED. Cliff had actually been spending a lot more time with the gang as of late, and was spending less time with Elise in public. This isn't because they had like broken up or anything, but it was likely that Elise was restraining herself in public for Cliff's sake, and so now they weren't making out like 24/7 anymore. Juliet then asks if Rudius could help her with a certain part of the figure that she's making. She's made quite a bit of progress, and with both Rudius teaching her as well as another dwarf student teaching her how to like hand carve figures, she's coming along at a great pace. And after that, Badigati burst into the classroom with his school uniform. He had officially enrolled at the academy as sort of like a publicity stunt. He wasn't studying, of course, but he made a habit of barging into classrooms and like talking to a few of the students there. Of course, most ran away from him, but those fearless enough to stay were rewarded with tidbits from his past stories of knowledge, but those were very far and few between. However, all things considered, everything somehow turned out all right. And something that you may have noticed, and I did when looking back at this episode's script, is how much and how little was skipped. Sure, there was like, we got skipped of Cliff's POV, but aside from that, there wasn't any major section skipped, just like a whole lot of character development and interaction between the characters. The scenes on their own might not mean much, but when piled together, it really does become something meaningful, because this is like one of the longest skipped content episodes to date, like for season 2 anyway. Yet I don't think I am literally just reading you the script, and I don't think that I could tell you, other than Cliff's POV, what was actually skipped. It's just there's a lot of what was skipped was cut scenes, like partially cut scenes, I mean. And so, and it's just a lot of the character development, the little like talking amongst themselves. It's something that Garnt talked about, Giguk, in one of his videos that I watched recently. I believe it was his like the manga is always better video, where he talked about like anime adaptations often like when it comes to prioritizing slow small scenes versus big action scenes, the anime usually prioritizes adapting bigger action scenes than the small ones, but it's the small scenes that make the big scenes rewarding, and that's what Mushoku Tensei cuts as well. Although, to be fair, you could say that there aren't really many big scenes right now going on to begin with, so they're just picking and choosing what small scenes to keep. But even still, there is stuff being skipped, which is unfortunate. It's a lot of the small character development moments in the interactions between each other, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. So anyway, if you enjoy this video, give it a like and subscribe for more Mushoku Tensei content, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.